For privacy reasons, names and places have been changed. This story is inspired by true events.
On a sweltering morning in July 1997, 25-year-old Connor Thompson set out to explore a remote section of the Great Wall of China near Muxianyu, Beijing. The passionate photographer and English teacher from Seattle had been documenting his summer adventures across Asia, capturing the beauty and mysteries of ancient civilizations. He never returned from his hike. Despite an extensive search operation by Chinese authorities and American embassy officials, Connor seemed to have vanished into the mist-shrouded mountains. For 21 years, his family lived with devastating uncertainty, clinging to fading hopes of finding answers. Then, in 2018, an archaeological team made a disturbing discovery beneath an abandoned construction site near the Great Wall. This is the complete investigation into what happened to Connor Thompson and how his final photographs would unveil a criminal enterprise that had remained hidden for over 2 decades. Before we continue, let us know where you're watching from, and if you enjoy this content, consider liking and subscribing to our channel. Now let's continue. On a crisp September morning in 1997, 25-year-old Connor Thompson set out to fulfill his lifelong dream of walking the Great Wall of China. An English teacher from Seattle with a passion for photography, Connor had spent the summer documenting his journey through Asia, filling journals with detailed observations and capturing thousands of images on his beloved Nikon camera. The Muxianyu section of the Great Wall stood quiet that morning, its ancient stones stretching endlessly across mist-shrouded mountains. Connor had chosen this less touristed area deliberately, writing in his final journal entry that he wanted to capture the real wall, the one that time forgot. Local vendors remembered him purchasing water and snacks, his enthusiasm evident as he practiced his basic Mandarin with them. That morning would be the last time anyone saw Connor Thompson alive. By sunset, his carefully packed backpack would be discovered abandoned at a remote watchtower, his camera and journal missing, leaving behind a mystery that would haunt 2 continents for over 2 decades. The first signs of trouble came when Connor failed to return to his Beijing hostel that evening. The hostel owner, who had grown fond of the friendly American teacher during his week-long stay, became concerned when Connor's bed remained empty the following morning. Having discussed his hiking plans with the staff, they knew exactly where he had gone. The initial response was swift but complicated by the vastness of the terrain. Local police combed the immediate area around Muxianyu, while emergency response teams searched the surrounding mountains. Connor's backpack, found perfectly placed against a watchtower wall, contained his passport, some energy bars, and a water bottle, but crucially not his camera or journal. As news of the disappearance spread, Connor's parents flew from Seattle to Beijing, their faces appearing on both Chinese and American television as they pleaded for information about their son. His students back in Seattle held vigils, sharing stories of the young teacher who had inspired them with tales of world history and ancient civilizations. The search intensified over the next 48 hours. Helicopters swept the mountainous terrain while teams of local villagers joined police in searching every crevice and hollow. The U.S. Embassy mobilized its resources, coordinating with Chinese authorities in what would become one of the largest search operations in the region's recent history. Connor's final movements were painstakingly reconstructed through witness accounts. A French tourist remembered seeing him photographing the sunrise from one of the watchtowers. A local vendor recalled him asking about access to a more remote section of the wall, away from the restored tourist areas. Each account painted a picture of an experienced traveler who knew what he was doing, making his disappearance all the more baffling. His journal entries from the previous weeks revealed a man deeply moved by his travels through Asia. He wrote eloquently about the cultures he encountered, the people he met, and his growing passion for documenting historical sites. His final entry spoke of his excitement about exploring the Wild Wall, the unrestored sections that few tourists visited. As the first week of searching drew to a close, authorities faced a troubling reality. Despite the massive effort, they had found no trace of Connor beyond his abandoned backpack. No blood, no signs of a struggle, no evidence of an accident. It was as if the ancient wall had simply swallowed him whole, adding his name to its centuries of secrets. The disappearance of Connor Thompson would become one of Beijing's most puzzling missing persons cases, transforming from a tragic tourist incident into something far more complex. What no one could know then was that the truth lay buried not just in time, but in the very stones of the wall itself, waiting 21 years to emerge and tell its story of greed, destruction, and murder. Captain Liu Wei had investigated hundreds of missing persons cases during his 15 years with the Beijing Public Security Bureau. But something about Connor Thompson's disappearance gnawed at him differently. The pristine condition of the backpack, the missing camera and journal, it all pointed to something more deliberate than a tragic accident. Within days of taking charge, Liu found himself working closely with Agent Catherine Chen from the U.S. Embassy. Chen, a seasoned diplomat with deep roots in both cultures, proved invaluable in bridging the cultural and bureaucratic gaps that often hindered international investigations. The investigation began with methodical interviews of every vendor and tourist who had been at Muxianyu that day. A pattern emerged from their testimonies. Connor had been asking specific questions about accessing the unrestored sections of the wall. Several vendors remembered him photographing areas that tourists typically ignored. One elderly shopkeeper's account particularly caught Liu's attention. The woman recalled seeing Connor in animated conversation with someone near the path to the unrestored section, though she couldn't make out the other person clearly in the early morning mist. When pressed for details, she remembered hearing raised voices, but had assumed it was merely tourists haggling over prices. Liu and Chen spent hours poring over Connor's recovered journal entries from previous destinations. His writing revealed a meticulous observer with an eye for detail. In Seoul, he had documented illegal modifications to a historical temple. In Kyoto, his notes detailed concerns about preservation efforts at several ancient sites. These weren't simply travel observations. They showed someone who understood the importance of cultural heritage preservation. The search teams continued their work, now focusing on the less accessible sections of the wall. Local guides, familiar with every crumbling watchtower and hidden pathway, led groups through treacherous terrain. They discovered several areas where stones had been recently disturbed, but forensic analysis revealed no connection to Connor's disappearance. As weeks passed, frustration mounted. Every promising lead seemed to end in disappointment. Security camera footage from nearby villages showed no sign of Connor leaving the area. Hospitals within a 100-mile radius had no record of treating any foreign tourists matching his description. His credit cards remained unused. His passport never left the country. The investigation took another turn when Professor Zhang Ming, a cultural preservation specialist, reviewed Connor's earlier photographs from the trip. Zhang noticed Connor had documented several instances of vandalism and unauthorized construction near historical sites. In one journal entry, Connor had written about his intention to report such violations to authorities. Liu found himself wondering if Connor's disappearance was connected to something he had seen or photographed on the wall that day. But without the missing camera and journal, such theories remained speculation. The investigation had reached a point where even the most promising leads seemed to dissolve into the mountain mist that frequently shrouded the ancient structure. By the time autumn turned to winter, the active investigation began to slow. The Thompson family returned to Seattle, their hopes dimmed but not extinguished. Agent Chen maintained regular contact with them, though she had fewer updates to share. Captain Liu kept the case file on his desk, reviewing it periodically, convinced that somewhere in the mountains along that ancient wall lay answers that remained just out of reach. The case had transformed from a missing person investigation into something that hinted at deeper, darker possibilities. But without concrete evidence, without a body, without Connor's missing camera and journal, the truth remained as elusive as the morning mist that cloaked the Great Wall on the day Connor Thompson disappeared. As winter settled over Beijing in late 1997, the investigation into Connor Thompson's disappearance began to slow like the freezing waters of the nearby Yangtze. The once constant stream of media inquiries dwindled to occasional calls, and the rows of search teams that had dotted the mountainside thinned until only the most dedicated remained. 3 months after Connor vanished, Captain Liu Wei faced the difficult task of reallocating his department's resources. The case file, now thick with witness statements, search reports, and forensic analyses, moved to a filing cabinet designated for unsolved cases. Each morning, Liu would pass that cabinet, his hand sometimes lingering on its handle, remembering the young American teacher whose fate remained unknown. International media coverage, which had initially painted the story as a dramatic mystery set against the backdrop of one of the world's most famous monuments, gradually shifted to other headlines. The Chinese Tourism Authority worked quietly to reassure foreign visitors that such disappearances were extraordinarily rare, while simultaneously implementing stricter safety protocols for hikers venturing into unrestored sections of the wall. Theories about Connor's fate multiplied in the vacuum left by concrete evidence. Some suggested he had fallen from the wall in an area too remote for searchers to reach. Others proposed he had chosen to disappear, starting a new life somewhere in Asia's vast expanse. A few darker theories emerged, hinting at foul play, though no evidence supported such claims. The impact on U.S.-China tourism relations proved subtle but significant. American tour groups began requesting additional security measures, and solo hiking permits for remote sections of the wall faced greater scrutiny. The U.S. State Department updated its travel advisories, recommending tourists stick to well-maintained, officially sanctioned areas of the Great Wall. Each year, on the anniversary of Connor's disappearance, his parents would return to Muxianyu. They would stand at the watchtower where their son's backpack was found, leaving fresh flowers and a new photograph of Connor. Local vendors, who still remembered the friendly young American, would greet them with somber nods and cups of hot tea. Agent Catherine Chen maintained contact with the Thompson family, sending monthly updates even when there was nothing new to report. She understood their need to know that someone in China still cared about their son's case. The embassy file remained open, a thin folder that grew only with annual notations confirming another year without answers. Professor Zhang Ming continued his research into historical preservation along the wall, occasionally discovering traces of unauthorized construction or stone removal. Each time, he would carefully document his findings and send them to Captain Liu, wondering if any might connect to the young photographer who had disappeared while documenting similar activities. As the years passed, Connor's case became a cautionary tale taught to new Beijing police officers, a reminder that even in an age of advanced technology and surveillance, the ancient wall could still keep secrets. His photograph hung in the precinct's cold case room, alongside others whose stories remained unfinished. The missing camera and journal took on almost mythical significance among investigators. Some believed these items held the key to solving the mystery, while others suspected their absence was precisely why the case remained unsolved. Somewhere, perhaps buried under 2,000 years of history, these pieces of evidence waited to be found. By 2005, Connor Thompson's disappearance had become one of those mysteries that seemed destined to remain unsolved, a story that tourists would sometimes hear from guides as they walked the ancient stones. But for those closest to the investigation, the case never truly went cold. It simply waited, like the wall itself, for time to reveal its secrets. The transformation of Connor's story from breaking news to cold case marked not an end, but a pause in a narrative that would eventually prove far more complex than anyone in those early years could have imagined. As Captain Liu W. would later reflect, sometimes the hardest part of an investigation is simply waiting for history to catch up with truth. In the crisp autumn of 2018, 21 years after Connor Thompson vanished, Dr. Lee May's archaeological team was conducting a routine survey of unauthorized construction sites near the Muxianyu section of the Great Wall. The morning light had barely crept over the mountains when one of her junior researchers called out in alarm. Partially exposed by recent rains, human remains lay buried beneath the foundation of what appeared to be an abandoned storage facility. The discovery sent immediate ripples through Beijing's law enforcement community. Captain Liu Wei, now nearing retirement, received the call he had waited for through 2 decades. Within hours, the site transformed into a careful excavation, with forensics teams meticulously documenting every detail of the burial site. Beneath layers of packed earth and construction debris, they found more than just bones. A badly corroded but still intact camera lay near the remains, its film surprisingly preserved within its weatherproof casing. The discovery of the camera sent a jolt through the investigation team. Few had forgotten the significance of Connor Thompson's missing Nikon. The remains told a story of violence. The forensic examination revealed fractures consistent with a brutal assault, suggesting the victim had suffered multiple blows before death. The location and manner of burial pointed to a deliberate attempt to conceal the crime beneath planned construction. When the forensics team carefully extracted the film from the camera, they handled it with the delicacy usually reserved for ancient artifacts. The processing of the film became a painstaking operation, with technicians working in darkness to preserve any images that might have survived 2 decades of burial. The photographs that emerged from development provided the first breakthrough in 21 years. The initial frames showed typical tourist shots of the wall, sunrise views, and architectural details. But as the roll progressed, the images turned darker. The final shots captured workers using heavy equipment to remove stones from an unrestored section of the wall, clearly documenting an illegal quarrying operation. The most damning frame showed a man directing the operation, his face clearly visible as he gestured toward his workers. This image would later prove crucial in identifying Wang Li, the construction foreman who had orchestrated both the illegal quarrying and, ultimately, Connor's murder. Dental records and DNA testing confirmed what many had already suspected. The remains were those of Connor Thompson. The young teacher's final resting place had been less than 2 miles from where his backpack was found that September morning in 1997, buried beneath the very operation he had unknowingly documented. The discovery sent shockwaves through both the archaeological and law enforcement communities. Professor Zhang Ming, who had spent years documenting the wall's degradation, recognized several of the locations in Connor's photographs. The images provided irrefutable evidence of systematic theft and destruction that had plagued the cultural site during the late 1990s. News of the discovery reached Connor's parents in Seattle via a phone call from Agent Catherine Chen, who had maintained her connection to the case long after her official duties had ended. After 2 decades of uncertainty, they finally had answers about their son's fate, though the truth proved far more horrific than any of their imagined scenarios. The recovery site became a focal point for a new investigation, with forensics teams expanding their search to surrounding areas. Additional evidence emerged: fragments of Connor's journal preserved between layers of earth and personal effects that had been buried with him. Each item added detail to the final moments of his life, painting a picture of a young man who had stumbled upon something he was never meant to see. The discovery marked not just the resolution of a decades-old missing persons case, but the beginning of a larger investigation into cultural heritage crimes along the Great Wall. Connor Thompson's final photographs would ultimately expose a network of illegal quarrying operations that had operated with impunity during the late 1990s, leading investigators down a path that would reveal decades of systematic plunder of one of humanity's greatest monuments. The discovery of Connor Thompson's remains and camera in 2018 triggered a new phase of investigation that would finally unravel a decades-old mystery. Captain Liu Wei, though near retirement, found himself reinvigorated by the case that had haunted him for 21 years. The weathered camera became the centerpiece of the investigation. Forensic photography specialists worked around the clock, using advanced digital enhancement techniques to extract every detail from the recovered film. Each frame revealed more about the illegal quarrying operation Connor had documented on his final day. Heavy machinery positioned against ancient stonework, workers methodically dismantling sections of the wall, and carefully organized transport vehicles waiting to carry away pieces of history. Professor Zhang Ming's expertise proved invaluable as the investigation deepened. He meticulously analyzed each photograph, matching locations and documenting the extent of the destruction. His research revealed a pattern of systematic theft that had gone largely unnoticed during the late 1990s, disguised as authorized renovation work. The investigation team created a detailed timeline using Connor's photographs. The images were time-stamped, showing he had spent several hours documenting the illegal operation before his death. The final photographs, taken in rapid succession, suggested he had been discovered by the quarrying crew. Captain Liu assembled a specialized task force, focusing on construction projects active in the Muxianyu area during 1997. Old permits, work orders, and employee records were excavated from municipal archives. The team interviewed dozens of former construction workers, many of whom had moved on to other provinces over the intervening years. A breakthrough came when one photograph showed a distinctive company logo on a worker's hard hat. This led investigators to a now-defunct construction company that had operated extensively along the Great Wall during the 1990s. Former employees, protected by decades of distance from the events, began to speak about their old foreman, Wang Li. Agent Catherine Chen coordinated with international art crime experts, tracking the movement of Great Wall stones through the black market. The investigation uncovered a sophisticated network that had specialized in selling historical artifacts to private collectors worldwide. Each stone removed from the wall could command thousands of dollars on the illegal market. The recovered fragments of Connor's journal provided additional context. His final entries described his growing suspicion about construction activities he had observed along the wall. He had noted license plate numbers, company names, and specific locations, information that now helped investigators connect decades-old dots. Professor Zhang's analysis revealed that the destruction Connor had documented represented only a fraction of the historical material lost during that period. The photographs showed sophisticated extraction techniques designed to remove the most historically significant stones while disguising the theft as routine maintenance. As the investigation progressed, a clear picture emerged of Wang Li's operation. He had developed a lucrative business model, using legitimate construction contracts as cover for his illegal quarrying activities. His crews worked in remote sections, carefully selecting and removing valuable pieces of the ancient structure, which were then sold through a network of antiquities dealers. The team's persistence paid off when they located several former workers who had been present on the day Connor disappeared. Their testimonies, offered in exchange for immunity, painted a chilling picture of what had happened when the young American photographer was discovered documenting their illegal activities. Captain Liu's team meticulously built their case, knowing they would have only one chance to bring Wang Li to justice. They gathered financial records showing suspicious payments, matched stone samples from private collections to specific sections of the wall, and created a comprehensive timeline of the quarrying operation. The investigation expanded beyond Connor's murder, revealing 2 decades of systematic looting that had caused irreparable damage to one of humanity's greatest monuments. What had begun as the resolution of a tourist's disappearance had evolved into an expose of cultural heritage crime on an unprecedented scale. As evidence mounted, the investigation team prepared to confront Wang Li, knowing that Connor's photographs would be their strongest weapon. The images, preserved for 21 years in that buried camera, would finally bring truth to light and justice to a young man who died trying to protect an ancient wonder of the world. The breakthrough in the Great Wall murder case came on a rainy Tuesday morning in November 2018, when Captain Liu Wei placed Connor Thompson's recovered photographs on the interview room table before Wang Li. The former construction foreman, now 59 and graying at the temples, stared at the images with an expression that shifted from confusion to recognition to barely concealed fear. 21 years had weathered Wang Li, but in the photographs from Connor's camera, his younger self stood clearly visible, directing workers as they systematically dismantled sections of the ancient wall. The timestamp on the final photograph showed 2:47 p.m. on that fateful September afternoon, less than an hour before Connor Thompson was last seen alive. The investigation team had spent weeks building to this moment. They had traced Wang's history through construction permits, payroll records, and real estate transactions. His modest salary as a foreman couldn't explain the villa he purchased in 1998 or his children's expensive foreign education. The financial trail revealed a complex web of payments from private collectors across Asia and Europe, each coinciding with periods of construction work along the wall. Former workers from Wang's crew, located across 3 provinces, had begun talking. They spoke of midnight operations, of carefully selecting the most historically significant stones, of trucks that came and went in darkness. One former employee described how they would fill the gaps with replica stones, masking their theft behind the appearance of routine restoration work. When confronted with the mounting evidence, Wang's carefully constructed facade began to crack. Captain Liu watched as the man's fingers trembled over the photographs, lingering on one that showed him examining a carved stone panel just before it was loaded onto a truck. That same panel had recently been located in a private collection in Singapore, valued at over $2 million. Wang's confession emerged slowly at first, then in a torrent of long-buried truth. He described how Connor had spent hours photographing their operation, initially unnoticed among the usual tourists. It was only when the young American began documenting license plates and worker identities that Wang realized the threat he posed. The former foreman recounted their confrontation in devastating detail. Connor had threatened to report the destruction to both Chinese authorities and international heritage organizations. He had refused bribes, refused threats, refused to surrender his camera. The violence that followed was swift and brutal. The confession unveiled a 2-decade operation that had systematically plundered one of the world's most significant monuments. Wang detailed how they had selected targets, choosing sections rich in carved stones and historical features. He named collectors, middlemen, corrupt officials who had turned blind eyes in exchange for payments. Each revelation sparked new investigations. Art crime units across Asia began tracking down stolen stones. Professor Zhang Ming's team documented the full extent of the destruction, matching Wang's accounts with historical surveys to create a comprehensive record of what had been lost. The evidence proved overwhelming. Beyond Connor's murder, investigators uncovered hundreds of instances of theft and destruction. Wang's operation had removed over 3,000 historically significant stones, had damaged irreplaceable Ming Dynasty carvings, had weakened entire sections of the ancient structure in their pursuit of profit. Wang's final admission came as daylight faded over Beijing. He led investigators to a storage facility where his last illegal cache remained hidden. Among the stolen artifacts, they found Connor's journal, preserved in a waterproof container, a trophy kept for 21 years, its pages filled with the final observations of a young man who had died trying to protect history. The case against Wang Li became one of the largest cultural heritage crime prosecutions in Chinese history. Connor's photographs, preserved through decades beneath the earth, provided irrefutable evidence of systematic destruction that had gone undetected for far too long. His final act of documentation had exposed not just his own murderer, but a criminal enterprise that had threatened one of humanity's greatest treasures. The breakthrough brought more than just justice for Connor Thompson. It forced a global reckoning with the vulnerability of historical sites and sparked new international efforts to protect cultural heritage. In death, the young teacher from Seattle had accomplished what he had died trying to do. He had helped save the Great Wall. In December 2019, Wang Li stood before the Beijing Municipal Court as Judge Chen delivered a sentence that would echo through China's cultural preservation community. Life imprisonment for the murder of Connor Thompson and the systematic destruction of irreplaceable historical artifacts. The former construction foreman, once a respected figure in Beijing's building industry, would spend his remaining years contemplating the true cost of his crimes. The trial had lasted 3 months, drawing international attention to the vulnerability of historical sites worldwide. Prosecutors presented over 2,000 pieces of evidence, including Connor's recovered photographs, forensic analysis of the burial site, and testimony from dozens of former workers. The evidence painted a devastating picture of cultural heritage crime that spanned 2 decades. The investigation's ripple effects reached far beyond Wang's conviction. Art crime units across Asia and Europe launched coordinated efforts to recover stolen pieces of the Great Wall. Within months, hundreds of carved stones emerged from private collections, their owners eager to avoid prosecution. Each recovered piece helped fill gaps in the wall's archaeological record, though experts estimated that thousands more remained scattered across the globe. Professor Zhang Ming led the monumental task of documenting the full scope of the damage. His team's report revealed that Wang's operation had compromised over 30 sections of the wall, with some areas suffering structural damage that would take years to stabilize. The Chinese government responded by allocating unprecedented resources to wall preservation, establishing new security measures and monitoring systems along its entire length. At Muxianyu, where Connor Thompson spent his final hours, authorities established a memorial site dedicated to his legacy. A small museum now houses his recovered camera, journal, and photographs, telling the story of a young teacher whose death ultimately helped protect one of humanity's greatest monuments. Each year, thousands of visitors pause there, learning how one person's courage sparked a global movement for cultural preservation. The Thompson family found a measure of peace in knowing their son's death had not been in vain. They established a foundation in Connor's name, providing grants to young photographers documenting endangered historical sites worldwide. Through this work, Connor's passion for preservation continues to inspire new generations of cultural guardians. Captain Liu Wei, who had carried the case for 21 years, personally supervised the implementation of new security protocols along the wall. Modern surveillance systems, regular archaeological surveys, and enhanced ranger patrols now protect the ancient structure. The changes came too late for Connor Thompson, but they ensure that future threats to the wall will not go unnoticed. The international community responded to the case with unprecedented cooperation in cultural heritage protection. UNESCO adopted stricter guidelines for World Heritage Site security, while law enforcement agencies worldwide established specialized units focused on preventing archaeological theft. The Thompson Protocols, as they became known, set new standards for site preservation and monitoring. Perhaps the most profound impact emerged in China's approach to cultural heritage crime. The government strengthened penalties for artifact theft and implemented rigorous oversight of construction near historical sites. The days when someone like Wang Li could operate with impunity were over, replaced by a system of checks and balances designed to protect centuries of history. As for the Great Wall itself, the case sparked a renaissance in preservation efforts. International teams of archaeologists and conservators worked alongside Chinese experts, developing new techniques for stabilizing and protecting the ancient structure. The sections damaged by Wang's operation became testing grounds for innovative preservation methods, turning tragedy into opportunity for advancement. 25 years after Connor Thompson set out to photograph the wall, his final images continue to serve as both evidence and inspiration. They hang in police academies, museums, and conservation offices worldwide, reminding new generations that the protection of our shared heritage sometimes comes at a terrible price. His story, once a mystery that haunted 2 continents, has become a testament to the power of truth to emerge from darkness, and to the enduring importance of preserving humanity's greatest achievements for future generations.